You know, I am in the mood to kick some serious knowledge. Let's get started. Mic muted. One of the things that, sorry, my mic was muted. Please let me know if you can hear me. Okay, thank you. Let me go back and say this again. All right, here we go. We're going to be covering the story of Ausar and Set, also known as Osiris and Isis. All right, and this is going to be covering one of the first religions of all time. It is the inspiration for the story of Jesus and Mary. One of the things that we need to keep in mind is that ancestors of antiquity were not primitive, but they were very smart, intellectual, had a high moral aptitude, so much so that they codified their idea and perspective on the universe into what we would say is a religion meaning to tie back to, but really it was a spiritual way of life. They lived this. This is what they were all about, okay? So it was not something to where they had to adapt to different religions as we have today in Western society. It was a culture that was deeply embedded in morality and in spirituality, okay? And they practiced this daily. It was embedded in everything that they did, okay? You could not separate them. There was no separation of church and state. The spirituality permeated every aspect of their lives. And unlike today, there was no conflict between science and religion in ancient Kemet and ancient societies. Whereas in modern times today, there is a contradiction. You're told to believe in the word of God, even though it may not make any sense, and it goes contrary to logic, contrary to your understanding of how things should work. And in fact, when you look at the so-called religion of Ausar and Set, the first mythological story, you will see that it's deeply embedded or rooted in science. So they were able to put in place a type of unified field theory, meaning they were able to tie everything into one, and there was no contradiction in that way. Whereas we have today, and this is because the Western mindset is based in left brain polarized thinking, which does not know how to reconcile opposites. So they have to create factions. They break everything down into different disciplines, and those disciplines cannot cooperatively work with each other. This is why you'll go to major schools and universities, and you will learn different subject matters that don't tie into each other. In ancient Kemet in Egypt, all the subject matters were tied into one another and taught from one perspective, and that's separated into disciplines, meaning you wouldn't go and study math, you wouldn't go and study history, you wouldn't go study science or astronomy. Those were all interwoven into one subject matter. And the reason why we have the various disciplines we have today is going back to what I said before, that the Western mindset does not know how to tie things together and to make them work harmoniously. This is a problem that they have. They have a problem of synthesis. They have a problem of abstract thought. They're very concrete in their thinking, and they're very segregated in their thinking. So they tend to separate things and use the separation as the basis of conflict and contradiction. This is why everything that manifests outside of themselves is seen as a force to be reckoned with, as a force to be conquered. Nature is to be conquered. The jungle is to be conquered, whereas with ancient man and woman, it was harmonious. It was trying to see how we could harmonize with the universe, harmonize with nature, and be one with it. Very different perspective. This is all codified in the science of the story of Ausar and Set. And one thing what you'll understand when you start to read into it, this story is not just a mythological story about gods and goddesses to be worshipped. It is a story about energies and intelligences. You see, we looked at things in terms of a science. When we talked about Atum, the god Atum, we are really talking about an atom, and then when we start to put these things together, Atum Ra, Amun Ra, then you're looking at the synthesis, us bridging the gaps, bringing together things so we can harmonize them, so they can work together. The two come together to form a different energy. So that's how our science worked. This is why Greece would send their scholars to study in ancient Egypt. And when they came back from Egypt, they would disseminate the wisdom and knowledge that they learned from the Egyptians to the Greek philosophers, to Pythagoras, to all of those there. And they consequently in history took credit for the work that they disseminated, but it was really the work of the Egyptians that they studied in the Egyptian temples and mystery systems. So the Greeks were not the originators of their knowledge and wisdom. They were not the originators of their gods. We put together what we call is the Ened, the tree of life, or the company of the gods, where we had let's call it a matrix, which had different gods and goddesses and different spheres that represented them. And we saw how each one related to each other, and each one had a hierarchy. And this was our version of cosmology, the cosmological ordering of things. And that's what cosmology is about. It's about the ordering of things. Ma'at is order. So all of these things are how we looked at the world. We didn't look at the world as to be conquered or to conquer contradiction. You see, Western mindset looks at things in terms of a hierarchy that you have to climb. We looked at things more so as an ordering of things according to their natural form and function, not just to ascend to power, but more so how everything has a place in space and time. Okay, so let's get that very clear, that our ancestors were not primitive, that they practiced a very sophisticated religion, and it wasn't about placating or worshiping gods for just the sake of worshiping them. It was to understand how intelligences or energies functioned in the universe, how those energies functioned in the universe, how those energies functions within us, how there was a connection between us and those energies, meaning that we pray to an outside God when in reality we are God, that we created the universe. We understood this very clearly, that God resides within us, that we are God. We just forgot how we created everything and who we really are. And the goal through the story of Ausar and Set is to resurrect the God within you. Whereas Western religion is all about placating to a God that's external, outside of you, that has no relationship to you, it's a God that you have to fear. And this God commands you to obey it, even though much of his knowledge is not understood. You just have to have faith. You have to have a suspension of disbelief. You have to suspend logic in order to work with their religions, whereas the religion of Ausar and Set doesn't ask you to suspend logic. It asks you to engage your logical faculties. It asks you to engage your left and your right brain. And it all makes sense if you understand how to break it down and if you practice it correctly. It is one of the religions that got man to his highest level of spirituality, to become the likeness of God, because the religion itself broke down the mechanics and the process of resurrecting the divine essence within you. There was no other religion that did that. You have religions like Christianity, Catholicism, and Judaism that has pieces of it, of how to do it, but it is incomplete. The religion of Ausar and Set is complete, or the spirituality. It is complete because it gives you the roadmap of how to attain divinehood in this lifetime. It explains to you from a holistic perspective who you are in the 3D physical realm and what happens in the duat, the afterlife, and why the two are important and work hand in hand. It doesn't negate one. It doesn't say life is important and death, whatever happens after, is not of any importance. It doesn't coerce you into doing good by telling you there's a hell. There is no such thing in the spirituality of Ausar and Set that tries to push you to do good based on the fact that you will be condemned in hell. They didn't believe in that. God gave you a free will, and you had the ability to disobey God, and God would love you just the same. Whereas in the modern religions, if you did not obey God, God would punish you with a disease, with fire, brimstone, whatever, which is a very primitive perspective. In those religions, the most important thing was for you to do good. In the Ausar and Set spirituality, doing good was a given. You get no extra credit for doing good. What was most important was that you followed your destiny, your path in life, and that you understand, according to the Chinese, the Tao, the way you should operate in life. You have to understand how you should function in life, because it is very specific. Spirituality is specific to you. It is not a one-size-fits-all cookie-cutter system. My destiny calls for me in this lifetime to act and pursue things in a certain way, whereas your destiny may ask you to do something totally different. In the religion of Ausar and Set, or spirituality, you follow the oracles, the great oracle of Tahuti. You go to it for counsel. In the Western mindset, their traditions, you have to obey an outside entity. You have to go to a minister, a priest, to get guidance. But he's just a man, fallible, who's controlled by his emotions. And if you look in terms of what has happened to many of these churches and ministers and preachers, they have succumbed to the pursuit of financial gain, which is their paramount concern. Not for your health, not for your benefit, not for your spiritual elevation, but for their own personal financial enrichment. And then when we look, which is the true test of a religion, we can look and see in terms of the global, how the globe has been tainted by Western concepts. We see that none of the non-Western religions have caused wars, have forced others to obey their doctrines. Whereas with Christianity, we can see very clearly that it was engaged in some of the most horrific acts of all time. One of which is the slave trade. We can see how white supremacists can claim to be Christians, true Christians. We can see how the Pope and the Queen of England sanctioned slavery, and they thought slavery was good. So then we have to now question Western religion. We have to question what they are doing, because something is not right and something is not working with their doctrines. Whereas the religions, the non-Western religions, have consequently always minded their own business. and were religions that focus primarily on the spiritual elevation of the individual through a process of cultivating not just certain virtues, but working on the technology. And what do I mean by the technology? I'm talking about that we knew that it wasn't about listening to the word, scripture, that would take you to the height of divine spirituality, but it was about the technology, meaning understanding the breathing techniques that would calm the animal spirit within you, understanding the right meditation techniques, understanding the right trance techniques, understanding the right yoga stances that would help you in terms of stilling the mind, getting to that state of nirvana, understanding the right medicines like DMT, ayahuasca, that can help you to communicate with ancestral spirits to give you guidance. These are the technologies that we engaged in to help us to resurrect the God within us. And it wasn't sitting in a hot church listening to a minister run his damn mouth because he had verbal diarrhea. He can't shut up. And all he wanted to do was get you to tithe, to give him and his wife money while they go and spend your money on material things like a jet plane, a new car, a second home. So I want you to understand that our ancestors were so advanced that the religion that they created, and I'm just using that word to facilitate the conversation, but it's really spirituality, that penetrated every aspect of their life, was a technology and process to come into the realization of their divinity. Whereas that is absent in modern religions, Western religions, but there is some remnants of that technology in there, such as the ability to go into trance, to possess the Holy Spirit. Those are African traditions, and those are things that came out of the technology of Ausar and Set. But they still lack a lot of the process, such as understanding the tree of life, the Ened, or the company of the gods, to where you climb up and climb down the tree, and you are working on each individual sphere on the tree to take you to the next higher level. One of the religions that has the process in place still to this day, in spite of colonialism, is the yogic masters of India. They still practice their true process in religion, and it hasn't been fractured. It hasn't been destroyed by Western colonizers. But it was those Western colonizers who went into Africa and corrupted the religion, brought it out, and then tried to feed it back, regurgitate it to the world as if it was the true religion of God. Let us now look at the story of Ausar Set as the roadmap, or the technology that can take us to a higher level, because we have to understand that our ancestors too they embedded within the stories analogies and symbolisms that would communicate to the right hemisphere of the brain. This is how they functioned. This is why the Bible really is a good work, but it's a work that has to be understood from the perspective of astrotheology, meaning that the stories within it are just metaphors. There is a hidden technology within it that is not deciphered because these individuals, these ministers and priests, really just look at it from a concrete surface level as if it were a history book. They're deaf, dumb, and blind to where they don't understand how to decode the symbolism, which could take them to a higher level. They're so concerned with the truth that they don't understand that to get to the truth, there is a process or technology that could take you there. And we have become corrupted by that because we, who were the victims of the colonizers, have now been some of the worst criminals, far worse than the colonizers themselves, by proselytizing this phony plagiarized religion to the world. And those of us who do that will be punished for doing so, because the gods of ancient time still exist and a desire to be resurrected. And they will not allow their wisdom and knowledge to be perverted as it has been. So those of us who follow those corrupt ways and preach from that corrupt doctrine will pay a heavy price. If you go and you teach people that the only way to be saved is through an outside entity, a conduit, a medium, a person, then you are evil. You are following an evil path because you are disarming people of their true power, and you are telling them to place their faith and hope in something that is external of them. You are telling them that to relinquish their own power and depend on something that cannot help them, that cannot save them, that cannot protect them. And the way that is done is through emotionalism. You see, they play on the emotional aspect of the Savior. And you get so wrapped up in that because you've been so victimized. You've been so stepped on and walked on that you're now ready to accept anything, even a lie. And that's how they take advantage of you. That's how they work it. That's how they get new people into the fold. They know that the masses of minorities have been beat down. So they come to them with the promise that if you believe in this guy, you believe in this person who has died for your sins, then you will be saved and you will be given riches. And if you look at the masses of people who follow that doctrine, most are poor. They're still poor. But the preachers and the ministers are living lavish lifestyles. The religion of Ausar and Set does not push you to believe in anything. It is not a religion of belief. It is a religion of logic. It doesn't push you to obey. It doesn't push you to follow. It doesn't push you to proselytize. It is a religion of technology. It is a religion that says, step 1, step 2, step 3, step 4, step 5, a proven formula to become divine being. You are free to do it or not. There is no penalty for not following it. The only penalty is you reap what you sow. But when the Pilgrims saw the Native Americans held their hands out and welcomed them as brothers. And the Pilgrim says, you are sinners. You must follow the word of Jesus. You are all sinners, even though the Native Americans fed them, got them through the winter. There was no doctrine in the Native American spirituality book that said treat others with kindness. This was something that was already within them, because they had reached a level of spirituality and they had reached oneness with nature, oneness with the universe. So they automatically, intuitively knew to do the right thing and to welcome the Pilgrims. But the Pilgrims, being left-brain, primitive savages, saw them as ignorant and saw them as primitive because they did not follow their doctrine of being deaf, dumb, and blind. So they murdered them. The Pilgrims murdered those native people. They decapitated them. They raped the women. They cut the genitals off the males. Because in their doctrine, if you do not follow the word, then the God sanctions violence against those. And what kind of God is that? What kind of God says that if you do not follow the word, then you have the right to strike them down? But many today believe in that God. Many today follow that doctrine. Do you understand that? And they follow it without question. And it's so sad. And it's so sad. Because you see, the religions were created by the ruling elite to imprison the planet in left brain thinking, in emotionalism thinking. The ruling elite does not want you to come into an understanding of your divinity, because if you come into an understanding of your divinity, a natural byproduct of that is you have God powers. And that is the last thing they want you to understand. That you have the power to control the matrix. They don't want you to understand that. Because that leads to a frightening conclusion for them, that their time is limited. This is a must. We must free the planet. We must move the people away from these primitive doctrines, away from these thought processes of left brain limited thinking. We must get people to start thinking integratively. Putting out information about tolerance, love, treating others with respect and kindness will not work until you get the people to integrate both the left and right hemispheres of the brain. And this is the message of the story of Ausar and Set. This is why Auser is known as the uniter of the way. This is why he is known as the ruler of Upper and Lower Egypt. So let's now look at the story of Ausar and Set. And remember, it is not a religion. it is not something to where we should be worshiping the gods just to worship them. And if you want a complete breakdown of the story and the metaphors within the story, get the book, the Metuneta Volume 1. That breaks it down for you. All right. So let us start.
Long before Ra, the sun god, had grown old and had left Earth to dwell solely in the sky, he had ruled the Earth and all of its inhabitants. He was able to see enough of the future to realize that any children by Nut, the goddess of the sky, would overthrow him as king. With his great power, Ra commanded that Nut should not be able to bear any child on any day of the year. This curse greatly distressed Nut. She knew that it could not be reversed. She consulted Thoth, a god of wisdom, education, and writing. If anyone could solve her curse, it was him. Thoth reasoned a way to get around Ra's command. In the act of superior cunning, he challenged Khonsu, the moon god, to a contest of checkers. For each game that Thoth would win, Khonsu had to give up a tiny portion of his light. Game after game, Thoth continued to win, and Khonsu ultimately lost a significant percentage of his light. Finally, Khonsu would play no longer. Thoth gathered up all the light he had won, and from it fashioned 5 additional days that would belong to no year. Until then, a year had consisted of 360 days, the number of degrees in a circle. These new days would become festival days between one year and the next. Because of the losses, Khonsu could no longer shine at a constant brightness throughout the month, but would have to grow dimmer toward the end of each month, and could only grow in brightness after the end of each month. Finally, Nut was able to have children. On the first festival day, she bore Osiris. Then, on each successive day, she gave birth to another god, Horus the Elder, Set, Isis, and Nephthys. Ra's curse had been fulfilled to the letter, but it had also been defeated on a technicality. When Osiris came of age, he married his sister Isis. Likewise, Set married Nephthys. Osiris, through the wisdom of his wife, became king of all Egypt, a land called in the early days Kemet, from Kum, which means black, like the dark, rich soil of the Nile flooding. Humans had not yet discovered agriculture, and frequently had turned to cannibalism in order to survive. They were a violent, warring lot, and this greatly distressed Isis. She discovered wild wheat and barley, which grew throughout the land. Osiris developed methods of cultivating these as crops, and taught humans the art of agriculture. He also taught them how to bake bread from the wheat, and how to brew beer from the barley. He taught them the arts of music and poetry. With every good thing that Osiris and his wife did for the people of the world, Set became more and more envious. The more people loved the God King and his wife, the more Set wanted to destroy them and to take the place of his.
So I want you to understand right away, right here, is that we have the balance of forces here. You will note that not only do we have a god, but we have a goddess. And this did not exist. This balanced perspective did not exist in European culture. It was always predicated upon the male energy, whereas in non-Western cultures, we venerated both the male and the female energy. And this was seen as balancing of the energy. But make no mistake, understand that there is a place for everything and everything in its place. Though the two ruled together, they possess very different energy systems, and they ruled in different ways in different capacities. So just understand that.
God King and his wife, the more Set wanted to destroy them and to take the place of his brother on the throne. Osiris had gone on a long trip to other nations to spread the knowledge of civilization to other people. Isis ruled while he was away. When the king returned, Set was among the first to welcome his brother back. But
now, the word of Ausar was spread through the troubadours, okay? The troubadours were the entertainers, the court jesters. So their role in ancient culture was to go throughout the different lands, the nomes, as they called them, the nomes, to spread the new doctrines of the king. And this is what we see in today's modern society when we have entertainment. We think it's just purely for entertainment. No, there is subliminal messages in the entertainment that we're seeing, but we don't realize it. But in ancient times, that's how they practice it. And the goddess that was in charge of the entertainment was Hathor, Heru.
Trip to other nations to spread the knowledge of civilization to other people. Isis ruled while he was away. When the king returned, Set was among the first to welcome his brother back. But the younger, jealous god had conspired with 72 of his wicked friends to defeat Osiris. Set had obtained the exact dimensions of his older brother and had commissioned the construction of an elaborate box to be made of cedar and ebony, plus gold and ivory. In celebration of his brother's return, Set threw the richest possible feast and invited his most loyal friends. After Osiris had grown relaxed and happy with song, food, and wine, Set brought out the elegant chest he had commissioned. He announced to the crowd that he would give this fine box to whoever would fit inside the chest perfectly. Several of the guests tried to fit within the finely made chest, but some were too short, too tall, too fat, or too thin. Finally, Osiris asked if he could try out the box. As the king hunkered down into the box, all of the guests gathered around in anticipation. Osiris cried out that the fit was snug. "The chest is mine!" Set hissed with glee. "Yes, my brother, and it will be yours forever." With that, Set slammed the lid down, and as many guests as could reach the box helped to nail the lid shut. They sealed every crack with molten lead and tossed the chest into the Nile. The river carried the chest downstream, and it came to rest at the base of a tamarisk tree. Soon, the tree grew around the chest, hiding it from view. The mayor of the town saw that the tree had grown more beautiful than any other.
Now, this is the tree of life, okay, springing forth from Osiris or Ausar. Now, one thing I failed to mention that I want to point out is that this story has been told many, many times throughout the different dynasties in Egypt. So the story has changed over time, and this is just one version of many.
And claimed it for himself, not realizing that it contained the body of Osiris. Isis looked far and wide for her husband's body. Following all of the clues, she came to the town where the tamarisk tree grew. Isis, in disguise, went to work for the mayor's wife. While there, she grew fond of their children and offered to make one of them immortal. While she was passing the child through flame to burn away the mortal flesh, the mother attacked Isis, not understanding the great honor the goddess had intended to bestow on her child. Thus, the mayor's child lost its chance at immortality. Suddenly, Isis took off her disguise and revealed her true nature. The mayor and his wife fell down in terror, asking what they could do for the goddess to win her pleasure. Isis asked only for the tree and its contents. When she retrieved her husband's body, she let the mayor and his wife keep the tree, and it became the most prized possession in the town because it had held the physical body of the god. Isis attempted to use her own magic and that of Thoth to restore her husband's form long enough to conceive a son. Before she could finish, Set discovered the body.
Okay, so a couple of things to note here. What you'll note is that these gods have the power of transmutation or to transform into many different things. And this is the aspect or power that you have as well, because who you essentially are is no one thing, hence you are all things. Also, you notice how Isis used her magic. This is, okay, for your understanding that you have power, you have magic that you can use as well, because these gods and goddesses reside within you. They are not external forces or external intelligences that have no relationship to you. Let's continue.
of Osiris and cut it into 14 parts and scattered them up and down the Nile Valley. Again, Isis searched, this time for the various parts of her husband's body. After she had gathered them, she had Thoth help her make her husband whole long enough to acquire his seed. She immediately...
Okay, so, sorry, let me just explain this because this is very important. I want to backtrack on this. That Set cut Ausar up into 14 pieces, okay? And this is the getting into the idea of the left brain segregative process about how truth is separated, and you cannot understand truth when it is in a segregated fashion, when it's in pieces. So for her to resurrect her husband, she had to find the pieces and bring them back together to bring them whole, holistic thinking. And therefore he could be resurrected. So two states we're looking at here is left brain ideology and right brain ideology. Okay, so let's continue.
Parts of her husband's body. After she had gathered them, she had Thoth help her make her husband whole long enough to acquire his seed. She immediately became pregnant with a son, whom she would come to name Horus. For years, Isis protected her son from discovery by Set and his evil friends.
Now, this is the story of the Immaculate Conception where she gave birth to Horus. Horus is where we get the idea of the hour from. And he is Heru, which is his real Kemetic name. And James Joseph Campbell, in his story of the hero's journey, used Heru or Horus as the basis for the hero of his stories.
When Horus came of age, he set out to challenge his uncle for the throne of Egypt. The conflict between Horus and Set took many forms. In one instance, both agreed to take the appearance of hippopotami and to fight each other underwater. Isis, fearing for her son, fashioned several...
Now, in ancient Egypt, the hippopotamus was greatly feared. In fact, the hippopotamus is a very fierce creature that would kill many Egyptians. And until even today, they're very territorial and very much feared. And here we see that they even there's even a god named after the hippo. But here we see that they transformed themselves into hippopotamus and fought under the water. All right, so we'll continue here.
Harpoons and took flight to throw them at Set. When she threw the first one, Horus cried out, "Mother, stop! You've hit your own son." After a few minutes of searching, she found Set and threw one harpoon after another. The first several either missed or bounced off. Finally, a harpoon struck Set squarely and wounded him. Set cried out for mercy, and Isis took pity on him. She helped him to the shore and nursed his wounds. When Horus heard what his mother had done, he grew so angry with her that he cut off her head and hid it from her in the desert mountains west of the Nile Valley. Realizing the mistake Horus had made, Ra, the sun god, came to the aid of Isis and helped to restore her head. In addition, he fashioned a crown of a cow's head and horns to give her added protection. Ra then punished Horus for what he had done to his mother. Despite the leniency shown him, Set still wanted to overcome his nephew. While Horus was recovering from the wounds Ra had given him, Set plucked out his eyes so that the young god was suddenly blind. Thoth found a formula from which he fashioned two replacements so that Horus could once see again. In yet another story, Ra commanded the Aeneid, Council of Gods, to ferry to the island of the Middle Ground.
Now I want you to understand that Tahuti restoring his eye is basically giving him his third eye, or giving him his sixth sense. And this, again, attunes us to the right brain. You see, our understanding is very limited in terms of what we only perceive what we can see, feel, hear, and taste, and touch, or what have you. But our sixth sense goes beyond that. It is an intuitive faculty that lets us know things without having to study them. It lets us know, and this knowing coming from internal is our connection to source energy. So we are to be informed by source, and not through reading or lectures. And this is why your third eye is important, because it connects you to that, and you become, as they say, a person who has the sixth sense. But this society is bent on ridding that aspect. They don't want us to use that aspect within us, which is dormant.
And to judge between the two opposing sides, Horus and Set. Ra also commanded them to tell Nemti, the ferryman, not to take on as a passenger any woman with the likeness of Isis. So, Horus, Set, and the members of the Aeneid crossed over to the island and attempted to negotiate a peace.
Now, the Aeneid is the company of the gods, and this is the cosmological ordering of things. And this here is the actual process by which you would become a divine being, because each god or goddess represents an energy, a set of mantras, a set of breathing techniques, a set of ideologies for you to follow. And you following each one while climbing the tree or the Aeneid will bring you higher to a level of divinity. So this company of gods is just not a randomized ordering, but it is a sophisticated hierarchy which shows you the process of spiritual elevation.
Isis, fearing that she and her son would lose to Set, turned herself into an old woman and tempted Nemti with a single gold ring as payment for passage to the island. Once on the island, Isis turned herself into a pretty maiden so that Set would be attracted to her. Set took a break from the meeting to be with the beautiful maiden, and Isis told him that her husband had died and that a stranger had claimed all of her husband's property. The same stranger had threatened to beat her son and to throw him out. She begged Set to become her son's protector. Overcome with sympathy, Set objected to the stranger's attempt to take their property, especially with the son of the former owner still there. Set said the stranger should be beaten with a rod, expelled, and the son be put in his father's position. At that moment, Isis turned herself into a bird and soared upward to a light in an acacia tree. She called out to Set, "Be ashamed. Your own mouth has said it, and your own cleverness has judged you. What more can you say now?" Set became humiliated and protested to Ra how Isis had deceived him. Ra told Set, "See, you have judged yourself. What more do you want then?" Set condemned Nemti and demanded that the ferryman be punished because he had taken Isis to the island. So, Nemti was summoned before the Aeneid, and his toes were removed. And Nemti gave up gold from that day forward. In a final series of battles, Set was ultimately defeated, and the members of his forces were scattered across the world. If you're a fan of mythology, make sure to check out the link in the description.
All right, okay. So one thing we have to note is that the only way that Haru was able to defeat Set was to go before Tahuti or Thoth for counsel and to get his third eye. And it was with that third eye he was able to see holistically and able to intuit the wisdom to defeat Set. And we note that in his battle and in his defeating of Set, he did not kill Set. He banished Set to the underworld. And this talks about how we understand the connection that we all have, and that something as though the death penalty was not one thing that ancient societies or ancient Kemet believed in, because they understood that we were all one and we were all consciousness and we were connected to each other, and that redemption was always possible. In this story, it's latent with a lot of beautiful messages that that when you watch or you read over and over again, you can decode what's going on, because some of the things in there you may say, well, why does he cut his toes off? What is the meaning of the gold? What is the meaning of the sarcophagus? Things like that. And they have meanings. They're just not arbitrary. They're symbols for certain things. And our ancestors knew that communicating in this way to the right hemisphere of the brain would communicate various different messages through layers. And this is the way that you have super learning or accelerated learning. This is how people can learn things quicker, but in learning one thing, they learn many different things, many different subjects, many different ideas, all laced within one concept. This is something that Western society doesn't do because they're based on factionalism. They break down things, they split hairs a lot, and they label and define until infinity, and things become convoluted and contradictory. In Kemet, they always looked for how things correlated between each other and how they related to each other. It was about that balance. It was about cosmology, the ordering of things. So it was a very different perspective and a very different way of life. And we see from this, it's not just a story, but it's communicating moral values. It's talking about judging, and realistically, when you look at this, you understand that Haru was not really fighting an outside enemy in Set. What he was really fighting was the animal spirit within himself. And the animal spirit was Set. It manifested as this physical evil being, but really was an aspect or the evil within himself. And this is what we find George Lucas in his film The Empire Strikes Back was trying to communicate when Luke Skywalker was going to fight Darth Vader. Luke had to be careful as not to be tempted by the dark side, or he would become he would become like Darth Vader. So your battle is not against external forces. Your battle is against the animal spirit within you. You have to subdue that animal nature and to allow your God aspect to rise within you. And a lot of that is symbolized by the Nile River and how, things would go into the Nile, meaning going deep into the subconscious mind, and come up from the Nile, meaning come up from the subconscious mind into the waking state. And even in other stories, when you get to the judgment scene, that really deals with the mammalian and reptilian brain and the neocortex. So our ancestors knew about the structure of the brain, how the brain worked, and how it assisted us into becoming God. So those stories, an example you see, like for example, a set flying, that the wings are a symbolization of your spirit taking flight. That who you are as consciousness is not bound and limited in third dimension. That it kind of takes flight, it travels. So again, more of the symbolism and analogies in the story itself. And you'll see how Aset had the sun disk given to her from Ra. Ra is the energy, the Kundalini or Chi energy within you necessary to have you have the energy you need to galvanize the force within you to accomplish great things. And it's that energy that can be used in magic and other things. All right. So that's a little bit about the story of Osiris Set. Like I said, there are different versions of the story, all again laced with meaning and very, very rich in metaphors. So I wanted to just have you guys understand that as the basis, because when you have that as a reference, the story of Osiris Set, then when you're working with the Oracle of Tahuti, and then when you're studying the Medunater, then everything makes more sense, because the religion of Osiris Set draws heavily upon that story, which we call the Osirian drama. All right, and if you don't have that as a reference, you'll get confused when I start talking about things like, the Ened, or the underworld, the Duat, or Set battling himself, an aspect of himself. Haru battling Set, an aspect of himself, and who really is Haru but the hero, Horus, the hour, things like that, and a Set Isis as the bird taking flight, the spirit flying, the essence of who you are. All right, so these metaphors are important for us as integrated brain thinkers, because the Western world does not want us to be geniuses or genii. And the only way to become a genius, a genii, is if you do what Nikola Tesla and Einstein and all those did was to merge the right and left hemispheres of the brain and to subdue the animal spirit, because emotion taints judgment, which is why Auser is a mummy, because he cannot be influenced by emotion. He's still, okay? And that's why he is a great leader, a king, because a king rules not with emotion, okay, through the neocortex, all right? You must rise from the mammalian and reptilian brain higher to the neocortex to the resurrection of Auser, all right? And this is why Auser is known as, the corn god, fertile, meaning that he rises from the farm, So again, more metaphors. I can go on with all these metaphors, but you know what I'm talking about, okay? That's how our ancestors did it. And this is why when you read the story of Jesus walking on water, turning water into wine, you have to understand the metaphor behind that. You cannot take that literally. This is why these ministers are nincompoops and they claim to be knowledgeable, They don't know anything. They don't know, and some do, they hide the truth, that Jesus is really the story of Auser, that Mary is Isis or Auset, and that whole story in the Christian Trinity is really Auser, Isis, and Horus or Heru. That is the Holy Trinity. The Immaculate Conception of Mary giving birth to Jesus is Isis giving birth to Heru. Heru symbolizes your will battling to assume the throne of kingship, battling what? Battling your emotions, Set, your emotions. There's no devil. The devil is within you. The devil is your emotions that are, if unchecked, will cause havoc within yourself and harm others. There is no hell. Do you understand? And these teachings have become perverted. This technology has become lost, which is why Auset put the pieces of Ausar back together to form holistic thinking. And that is the basis of truth. You don't get truth from segregated thinking. You can't. It doesn't work that way. My beloved, if you've loved this message and you like my channel, please donate to the channel or become a Patreon supporter. I want to thank you all for tuning in today, and I hope this has been a great session for you all. And I thank you for your comments and your fellowship. This is Kisak Ma'a Keperu, son of Ma'at and Tahuti. My aunt is the beautiful goddess Heteru. Until my next broadcast, Amun Ra.